The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the third compilation of entries from the 2022 Orchestration Challenge Roundup of website subscribers. Starting with this score by Alexander. Okay, so to start right off, Alexander, maybe we have had this conversation before, but I really want you to learn this trick, okay? I'm selecting just any note in the score, and I'm in Sibelius, so I'm going to type Command E or Control E to start the text thread or the blinking caret, and I'm leaving my thumb on that key, on the Command or Control key. Then I'm just going to reach over with my finger and hit the F key or the P key, right? So it's like, so just so long as you leave your thumb on that, you can type anything. It's a little difficult with Z because sometimes Z realizes itself as like it, Command Z. It understands that to be undo. So anyway, but yeah, so like there's really no reason for you to be in this situation of just typing whatever, right? You should learn that trick because it is actually as fast as just typing things normally. Okay, so please learn that trick and use it on your next entry. Okay, let's see one other thing. I'm going up to the Home tab and I'm hitting the transposing score widget. So here we go. All right, see that's a lot more readable for me. Let's drag this up here so it's closer. Okay, so now that looks cool. So let's talk about a few things in the score before we get into the actual scoring. One thing is that you have interpreted the destination of the harmony here to be E minor, right? As we can see in the way that you've got a root E down here for E minor. And that's true on the next page as well. Right, we've got this pizzicato E here, turning this into an E minor chord. Okay, but the problem here is that this is not. I mean, it seems like it's E minor, but it's not. It is a G6 chord, right? So in other words, it's like got the added sixth. The E is a function of it's the melody obviously, but it's also like a function of the harmony there of making this kind of more of an impressionistic harmony rather than just like a more of like classical or romantic harmony. See, so like when you put a root E on the bottom there, it takes away the ambiguity, right? It sort of is telling us, hey, this is E minor, right? It's not saying, well, it could be E minor, or it could be a G major chord with an E stuck on top, right? So I think you're spelling it out, and you may be spelling it out wrong, right? So why not just change these to G's, change all these low E's to G's, and listen to it again and see how it sounds, right? Okay, and let's see. So this is all fine. I like the octaves going to unisons here. That's perfectly fine. First and second working together. Now here, third and fourth, I think you just need one single horn here. I would say just have your third horn play this. All right? Okay, so those are just some things that popped out at me. Engraving these as nice, beautiful, easily readable dynamic markings rather than just text. All right, so now, with all that out of the way, I appreciate that you really took the time to tell us which player is playing what on what entrance and so on and so forth. So that's fantastic. I like the fact that you have balanced out your harp, and you're making some attempts to sort of mix things, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, I think this works. This is great. Forte here with the harp. I think right here, whatever instrument is the loudest, the harp should be 1 degree louder, right? So this should be mezzo piano, right? If you want that balance, or piano is fine. It should be at the same dynamic level or louder, depending on the density and the and like whether or not the pitches of the harp are doubling the actual pitches of, like, say, the winds or strings, right? So if the harp is covering some of the same pitches as the winds or strings, then it should be 1 degree louder. If it is not, then it can be the same volume. That's one way of treating this. And of course, just everything is situational, right? It depends is the answer to almost every orchestration question. I would say in this case, I would actually not mark your strings down to pianissimo or triple P especially, right? Maybe pianissimo. But they probably would sound fine if it would probably sound fine if everything was piano and the harp was mezzo piano. And you left your horns pianissimo. Now here you're saying pianissimo sforzando, right? So what does that mean? Does that mean that you are having this play like a loud accent in the midst of all this? And notice that that Sibelius is sort of interpreting it to be sort of mezzo piano, right? So I think that if you just meant that this should be accented in pianissimo, you should just put an accent on it. If you meant for this to be like a louder note, then you should just tell us what dynamic you want that to be, right? What do you want it to be? Mezzo piano, mezzo forte, whatever. Just give us the dynamic, or give us the dynamic below that, and then put an accent mark on it, right? So if you think, oh well, mezzo forte or mezzo piano with an accent, right? So yeah, I mean, it's just clearer because sforzando could mean anything, right? A sforzando in pianissimo could be a note that sounds piano that has a slight dig at the beginning, right? So, I mean, it just depends on the context, right? And in the context of this, where the strings are so soft and the winds are also playing softly, the horn players would probably be loath to really do more than just a slight, maybe a little bit louder and a slight punch at the beginning of the note, right? I mean, that's really is what an accent is. It is a it is an accentuated attack, right? There's got a spike to the beginning of it, but it doesn't necessarily change the dynamic. So, as far as Sibelius is concerned, it would put a punch on the beginning of this note and then say, okay, well, diminuendo from pianissimo. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about the scoring. Like I like the idea of the harp basically sort of punctuating the beginnings of these bars. That's very cool. I think this is really neat at the end here. I like that you don't overdo or overuse the harp. That's really nice. And I think that your use of the horns here is judicious. I can see what you want here. I mean, that you want to sort of give some weight to the first bassoon. Even at that, this will still be more about the sound of the horn than it will be the sound of the bassoon. However, seeing as how you die away really quickly in both pitches, and you have other instruments carrying on the E around it on either side, I think it's totally fine. Okay. Also, see, here is a situation for other people who I talked to about having a dotted whole note right here instead of breaking it up into two dotted half notes. See, here, two dotted half notes tied together works fine because Alexander wants to absolutely indicate that the diminuendo starts in the middle of the bar, right? Which if you put let's say you put a dotted half note and then you have a whole stack of instruments, dotted whole note. Let's say you have a dotted whole note. You have an entire stack of instruments and they're all playing different things, and you're starting from the middle of the bar, you have diminuendos and so on. And then you just have a diminuendo in the middle of the bar following a dotted whole note. Well, the thing about it is that when it is engraved and everything is squashed down into smaller staves, then you'll get a dotted whole note and you'll get a diminuendo right after it and then a bar line. So the player will perceive that as just diminuendo across the entire bar. So this gives the orchestrator some insurance that it will be interpreted from the right place. Okay. Having said that, though, sometimes you get players that will just look ahead and they'll be listening to the rest of the music and they'll say, well, I'm just going to start diminuendoing a little bit. I'm just going to start letting go a little bit early, right? Now here, you're saying pianissimo sempre, right, or triple P sempre, all right? But if we go to the next page, we have different dynamic markings, right? So, yeah, don't give us the term sempre unless you intend an extended passage or more bars where there will be possible changes in other instruments or whatever, or the context could be perceived as fluctuating when you don't want it to, all right? So here you just really don't need the sempre at all. All you need is the triple P. Okay, now here I would say that if this is where I would say if both instruments are going to have a diminuendo from the beginning of the bar, which is what it seems, then the first voice above that can be scored as a dotted whole note. Okay? But I mean, you could always put in a first voice diminuendo above it from the middle of the bar if you wanted to. So this would be second voice and that would be first voice. Anyhow, that would be something that figure out. So, so apologies for not mentioning that earlier that the clarinet would be carrying on the same pitch as the first bassoon and third and fourth horn, which once again I recommend should just be the third horn, right? Okay, so anyways, apologies for that that failure to mention that. Okay, so now let's go back to the scoring. I keep sort of getting mired in different little issues, and here's another one for you to think about, Alexander. So, did you watch the 12 common scoring errors? Did you notice that there was one about not dropping the piano phrasing onto winds and strings? So, if you've been following these, you'll have already heard me say this to everybody, but what you're doing here is like you're ending up with slurs across across a pickup, which is also something that is in the is pointed out as a common scoring error. You end up with notes that are repeated over, under a slur, which the intimation here is that is portato, right? So let's look at it this way, right? You're sort of implying two different styles of articulation, right? Ta, ta. Now watch what happens here. Ta, right? So the player has to sort of kind of push a little bit with their tummy, right? Or they have to ignore the slur and then just basically tongue this legato, right? But the thing about it is, by doing that, you're taking the decision away from yourself as an orchestrator about what to do here, and you're giving it to the players. And they'll just do anything. And then, like, maybe you'll have some players playing portato and some players tonguing, and the string players here just going, oh, jeez, I guess I'll just do this under one bow. But it's like really inexact and whatever, right? So you'll just have all these different approaches. When you, the orchestrator, could make the decision to not do that, or to maybe give everybody portato, like just leave the slur, but like have sort of portato tenuto marks, right, with a slur over them, just to really define that group as a portato. Or or whatever, or you could just slur up to the A and then have these notes tongued and bowed separately and whatever, right? So this is not a bowing pattern that you have put here, right? This is long down bow and then up bow and then down bow and then up bow, and it just it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But what if it were down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? Or up, down, up, down, right? I mean, there's it just makes more sense, right? That there's more definition to the notes rather than just having a big old honking slur over that. All right. So if I run into this problem in further, or as I run into this problem in further evaluations, I'll just refer back to this just to save time, okay? But please, folks, do not just drop the slur pattern of the piano part onto your winds and strings. Think about how they're going to tongue things. Think about how they're going to bow things, okay? That's really important. All right. So having said all of that, let's get back to the scoring once again. So one thing that I sort of miss here is the octave, right? So we just have a flute with some violin behind it, right? And then, and then like there isn't any octave note below that, right? And I mean, I sense the sort of minimalism in effect here. You're basically sticking that note at the bottom, but what you do when you put the note at the bottom here is that you turn this into triads, right? So this becomes B, sounding D, and sounding F sharp. So basically it's like you have the B at the top and then you have this B minor triad below, right? Rather than the B octave with the thirds hanging below, right? So when the thirds hang below, then it turns into sort of this false bass kind of a feeling, faux bourdon, right? And like it really like defines the harmony, and that's another reason why you kind of get into trouble with having the root, like having the feeling of a root E here in the viola and in the harp, right? When it's really not intended to feel like a root chord at all. The E, when you put the E in this position, the function becomes that of a tonic minor, right? Rather than the sixth sort of just hanging up there above the fifth and the third. All right. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't really intend this to be to turn into harmony lessons, but that's just something to think about. Okay. So, but this is very cool right in here. I like how you come in here with the horns, And I think this is very, very nice scoring right in here. So I don't have a big problem with this. I would just say watch out about that the variations in density in the scoring make emotional sense. Here I think that you are doing that, right? So it's sort of stripped bare. Here it's fuller, stripped a little barer again, but adding pizzicato, and then fuller this time with more horn and kind of more active harp, and then leading downwards to this ending. All right, so that all works fine for me. Now here on the next page, did you watch the cautions, like the not cautions, the pitfalls video, right? So what I really talked about was the importance of the middle voice, right? So here you're kind of separating things out. So you have the melody and the harmony and all the other elements, and I'll talk about the positioning of these elements in a second. But like the sense of interruption, right? You know this. You've got this da 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 da. Right. So I just really feel like what is missing in these rests is the sense of a middle voice, right? Which is something that I talked about in the pitfalls video. There's like the sense that that this is reaching up to the engagement of the middle voice in the piano part, and then and those parts that have that role are being placed so high that it is that they are their own kind of a thing. And it's also really strange the way that you have got your flute an octave lower right here, where it's very hard to hear below the oboes, right? So the positioning here, the cross voicing, as you might say, of turning, once again, you're turning these into triads by putting the kind of turning the melody notes into roots of triads, right? Whereas above, they add more ambiguity to the harmony, right? Okay, but what's missing right in here is that sense of middle voice, and it doesn't really quite come in until we have these lower notes here in the bassoons, right? Where there is some connection here going on with these beautiful arcing melodies that you've got here. I really love the division here of arco and pizzicato and all that stuff. The basses could just do that all day long, and I think it works really, really well the way that you've scored it. And this is all really nice right in here. This, these sixths, right? But like, you're giving the middle voice to the first oboist, right? And so, I mean, it's not the most balanced kind of a thing, but it does work, right? But like, I just like, it just seems like whenever you have a chance to have the flute play a role where it doesn't get buried, you take the opposite option, right? So here, this E is perfect, it's beautiful, it is audible. But, have we not talked about this? Have we not heard me lecture about how the flute going too low gets buried in a texture? And, in this sense, you are also saying, furthermore, pianissimo sempre, right? So here, this actually, pianissimo sempre, that makes a lot of sense. You can still have some nuances in a sempre, but there, the idea is that the entire passage or most of the rest of the next few bars is going to be really, always pianissimo, right? Okay, but back to the whole question of flute. The flute really belongs up here, tracking, or doubling the first violin part, right? Now, dropping it down an octave puts it into a place where it turns these into triads, taking away their harmonic ambiguity, but if it were audible, right? But it isn't really audible, so the first flute sort of disappears. And then the same thing here, right? And then these five notes, right, just become very hard to hear. The second violin will come through beautifully, right? Now, if you really want this function to be audible, it should be played by clarinet, not by flute. right? But as it is, I mean, you can also hear from the mock-up, and then you bring the horns in, and the horns are adding, like even at pianissimo. If you want to do this, just type X, right, and then you get the slur on both sides. Or you can do this. Here's a thought. Just select both of these, select that, and then type Option or Alt 2, right, and then type X here again. Right, and then you get second voice below with its own slur, and first voice above with its own slur, and everything, like all the laws, obey each other. Right, so that's one way of doing this. One way of clarifying that, if you really want that slur. But of course, like in first voice, I'm just going to type Option or Alt 1, and then just delete one of these slurs, and this is perfectly fine, right? Some engravers might take issue with that and say, really, I really prefer to see the slur on top. But, I mean, it's not going to matter to the players because the players are going to have individual parts. But I really do like the idea of first and second horn playing octaves together, and that's all really strong, and it's great. You don't even need this staff right in here, nor do you need the harp staff if it's not going to be used on this page. Okay, so back to the scoring. When you bring in the horn here, its overtones will do further damage to the usefulness of this flute here. So it really is just, I mean, yes, if everybody were playing pianissimo, that would be fine, but you have these beautiful, smooth, silky strings doing all kinds of things around the same area, and they will just make they'll make the flute, they'll suppress, at the very least, suppress the role of the flute. So, and the other problem too is, like, by making the oboes pianissimo and having the violins piano, that means that this middle note, this F sharp, is not going to be of equal strength. But I mean, then there's the whole thing about, like, well, in a soft texture like this, sometimes the winds can be too shiny, especially the oboes, so some sort of balance might end up being the realistic thing, right? And then, of course, there's the whole question of, like, once again, we have piano-like slurs over everything, right? So, I mean, don't you want ta, 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 ta? Do you really want ta, ta? Meanwhile, ta, or, let's say this is a down bow, down, up, all right? Down, up, down, up, down. I mean, see, this makes more sense, right? So, anyways, just, like, really seriously do not import the piano phrasing, right? Just figure out how to divide things. Like, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? So I think that's just that's a better kind of a thing. And, as far as the winds are concerned, you could just have the winds just cover the entire two bars, right? But you really do need a solid downbeat more than you need to slur across the pickup, right? I'm just seeing it, and yeah, slurring across the pickup is a valid thing if you're pushing into that beat. But I mean, I don't really see that, right? I don't see things like a crescendo into it, or the implication of emphasis, slurring up. I don't see any of that. I just see the piano part. So really put some thought into this, all right? So these details are really important. Because, your approach to scoring here is really straightforward and effective, right? So you can take all of that brain power, right, that isn't being taken up with incredible, huge calculations and really devious stuff that we've seen in some other entries, and just really beautifully finesse a lot of these other details. Add more of, like, just, instead of cutting off the nose of these slurs, incorporate the pitches that would be played by the left hand, right? So like for instance, E here and F sharp here, you could have E, C sharp, E, F sharp, E, F sharp, right? And then here, like this C sharp here, could possibly work its way into the viola part or something. Do you know what I mean? So there are ways of having the middle voice be more prominent and more active in the strings, and then I think they would make it much richer and stronger. Okay, well I've gone on way longer than I intended to with this, but I mean it's really charming, it's just a lovely score, Alexander. So me picking it apart is not saying it's bad. It's actually saying, wow, this is really worth spending a lot of my time on and helping out Alexander to make his scoring better and better. That's the whole intention. So it's not a beatdown at all, right? So just really don't score your flute in places that are invisible, right? Once again, it's just so important, okay? If there was one message that I could really get across, I felt that I tried to get it across for the past 2 or 3 years. Really, don't put your flute in places that are invisible for it, right? Because it's just a lot of effort for no. Here you're pushing it up to mezzo forte, but it doesn't matter because the horns and the strings are just going to absorb it, right? They could be playing forte, and they would still get absorbed with mezzo piano strings and piano oboe and so on. All right. So anyway, that is all for this one. Thank you so much, Alexander, for subscribing to the website and for sending me this really cool entry. And I'm really hoping that you, along with everybody else in this compilation and in all of these compilations, will consider entering the next few challenges, because I really have some special things planned for the next 3 years. It's all mapped out. So next year we'll have an option to score things in a style that we generally don't, and there will be two different choices that are interrelated. And then the year after that, there will be a work by a composer that most people have never even heard or don't even know about. And then the composer is very famous for doing other kinds of music. And then the third option is going to be a orchestravaganza, okay, with a huge amount of choices and options, and with an enormous amount of lessons attached to that from me, which I'm going to be preparing over the next few years. Okay, well, anyhow, that's all for this evaluation. Thank you so much, Alexander. Now on to the next one. Lots of lovely ideas here, Daniel. Let's just jump straight into the scoring, and I'll give you any possible pointers as we go along. Okay, so here you have non-vibrato flutes, English horn, and of course, like the clarinet doesn't need that caution because it is non-vibrato. Of course, a lot of clarinetists will tell you, well, I do add vibrato very, very, very slowly. But for all intents and purposes, it does not have a noticeable. It does not have a vibrato in the way that we understand it. So the lack of vibrato and that restraint actually helps to helps the harp to become clearer, right? I would give yourself a second space between the dynamic marking and any kind of text afterwards, right? So P space space gently. All right. So yeah, so English horn and flute in octaves. I think that is a beautiful combination. And then the clarinets below, sort of temperate, and then you've got your harp. I mean, the harp worked fine at piano, but I don't know how you had your mix settings, right? I would still be tempted to mark this mezzo piano, just to give the harp a little bit of an edge so that it would be more audible. Okay, and notice, I had a big discussion with Alex in the previous evaluation about not putting the melody note below the those thirds, and in terms of like sort of taking away the context of where the melody's positioned in the harmony. But since this is harp, and really kind of we're hearing more of the upper overtones anyways, that will be matching up with the English horn and the flute, it's permissible. It's fine. If that were a concern. All right. Now, if you are doing nuances like this, hairpins like this, and you're ending up back where you started, you don't need to restate the dynamic. Okay. We know it's piano. All right, and then we have continuing on here, piano crescendo to mezzo piano, and then diminuendo to pianissimo. Okay, so I would say if you're going to do that, and you're going to make sure that the harp is a little bit louder here, so it doesn't get swallowed by the other instruments, it should share the same increase of strength, right? So mezzo piano here, go take it all the way up to mezzo forte here, okay? And that is fine. See, like that's a level of dynamic mixing that I think is permissible. If you have your harp a little bit bigger than the rest of the texture, your horns and trumpets a little smaller, then I think that works fine. Okay, so it's one of my concerns with the one of my scoring criteria was the does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? So we definitely have a timbral progression here, and I think that you could have even leaned into this further. You could have pushed all the way up to mezzo forte here, and then maybe done a quick diminuendo down to piano, and then diminuendo to pianissimo. I think that would just really bring out the emotion there. This could come in mezzo piano. You could mark forte for your harp and your glockenspiel. Right. So I think that would probably just really have this beautiful flush of color and emotion and so on. Now, one thing that, yeah, okay, so you just have a single oboe. Yeah, all right. Yeah, and you are more or less, yeah, like you're basically solving the problem of whether or not to mark things A2 or 1 or 2 or whatever, just by having separate staves for almost everybody except for clarinets. Then here you have them A2. Yeah, so, all right, so that's all good. And you have a single oboe and an English horn player. Okay, well, I mean, that all works for me. I think that's fine. Now, here you say solo with bassoon, solo with oboe. That is certainly welcome. That's fine. It helps the player out. But, the thing about it is that you probably don't even need to, you just have, 2 bars of this, or, maybe 3 bars if you count these notes here as starting the solo. So, that marking may be unnecessary, right? It might be enough just to mark it solo. Now, here, you're starting the entire passage mezzo piano, and I think that would work great in a film score, right? Where things sort of have to be in a kind of a middle dynamic a lot. But I mean, the thing about it is, it's almost warm, and you are increasing up to mezzo forte, which is, honestly speaking, it is a moderated soft dynamic to a moderated loud dynamic, right? So you're not really going very far. And these accents imply that you are actually intending this to be forte, right? So why not just mark it forte? Why not just push all the way up there to a nice solid forte and leave the brass down here at mezzo forte? I think that would be even more effective. And why not just start piano? Because if you have this big flush of emotion here, even if you don't follow my advice, even if you just go up to mezzo piano and then everybody diminuendos down to pianissimo except for the bassoon and oboe, right? Like, you'll have had this flush of emotion. You can start again at piano. Just because you had piano here and piano there and piano everywhere, sort of like, Old MacDonald, it's still, you change the context of the texture enough, and you had enough of a fluctuation here that you can go back to piano, and I think that you would actually get a better sound from the orchestra than mezzo piano. And then you could bring out certain things much more clearly, right? And same thing here. Trumpet at the loudest should be piano. Right, so how about if everybody is piano here, and then these trills can come out. You can mark them mezzo piano, and even though you have a lower flute here, it's still not that low. It's I would say anything like A and below, or G and below, like, it just really gets swallowed up. But B, you're starting to get into a territory where it's more audible, and then especially playing thirds with the English horn, that the combination of the two will help it project a little bit more, I feel. And then especially like just climbing up here, and you have this flute trill up here on the E and so on, and then you have these combined trills. Here I would take no chances whatsoever. I would have a trill line, and I would have it on either side. Right? I would have a trill above and a trill below. I mean, of course, that's probably over fussiness. If you have, the implication is, if you have two notes on the same stem and you are writing a marking like trill above that stem, the implication is that both notes are trilled. So you don't have to follow my advice, but I've seen so many situations like this where the copyist, sees something like this, and they only write the trill for the top player, right? That just something gets stuck in their head, and then if you call them on it, they say, all right, and then it says, all right, they were on one stem, oh damn, I forgot, blah blah blah. Or you'd even go to the pains of having separate voices, like I have a separate stem going down for the second voice, and then having the trill below that, right? I mean, just to really make sure that there are no errors in copying. So, anyways, it's probably overkill, but it's just something. I think if you're going to give these players a line, then you should give these players a line, because there's also the implication possibly that you're just going da, right, rather than da all the way through. Okay. All right, so that's just some engraving stuff that could lead to problems elsewhere. But yeah, I just feel that you should just go ahead and push. Why let mezzo dynamics define everything? Right? Just there's a lot of mezzo on this page, but I think you should just commit, right? Commit to it, right? Just go ahead and let it speak its mind, right? Now here I would say, yeah, so here you're doing brackets for non-arpeggiando, and then arpeggiando, and then, yeah. So that's all fine. It's a good way of just, quickly. And then, you have different styles of arpeggiando, right? You have both hands rolling at the same time, and then you have a roll from bottom to top. Yeah, so, I mean, that's all good. And some people even put, a bracket on each, over each hand, right? So a bracket here and a bracket there. Is actually the way that I would have probably scored it if I were to use brackets. But I might just say ARP period, and then non-ARP here, and then ARP, and then non-ARP. That's another way of doing it. But I mean, it's all acceptable. But there's the thing about audibility. I feel that if you were to go down to piano, and then you were to continue on with a harp scored at mezzo piano, then these chords are fine. But I think if you insist on having mezzo piano here, the harp chords are probably not going to stand out that much, and it might be better to actually have them an octave higher, right? Just score them an octave higher, score all of this an octave higher. and then it'll stand out from the mix a lot better. And of course, mark it up. If this goes to mezzo forte, this should go to forte. This is a nice combination here. The cellos going up to the violas, the doubled by bassoon going up to two clarinets. It's probably a little too thick. I think just a single clarinet is fine here. And that's all doubled by harp, right? But once again, the harp might get swallowed. So I would actually have this playing octaves, right? So just score a second part for the right hand and just put it an octave higher, right? And then I think that it would it'll be much more audible. Okay, so we've discussed the scoring here. I think that it's all fine, aside from certain issues with the dynamics. Now, continuing on, just really focusing on the scoring. I like the idea of combining trills and tremolo here, and the players working together. And then here you go to tremolo in the violas, but not in the clarinets. But however, we have the trills up there in a flute and English horn an octave higher. So that I think that's all fine. That works fine for me. Yeah, and this is nice. The treatment of the melody, the oboe and flute working in octaves. Yeah, just so much more warm weight on the lower part of the octave, rather than if it were octave flutes, right? And then this is all great. This jump up here, and the trill parts joining in, and like a big trill at the end. I think that's really all fun. It might be a little too trilly, right? But you just have to make that decision yourself. And then we just sort of have this kind of second bassoon doubling double basses and so on. I think that would work fine. But once again, I would just mark everything down to piano at the beginning and see how that works. But then have the trills maybe mezzo piano, and the same thing for the harp part. Or you could have the English horn stay at piano with everybody else, but have the second flute up to mezzo piano, just for some insurance there. And then as things push forward, have the horns come in at piano, crescendo to mezzo forte, and then just try going crescendo to forte here, right? Just to really give it some, go somewhere, go from restraint to strength, not moderated restraint to moderated strength, right? Just really commit to it. Just go ahead and let the music speak out. You don't have to follow the exact dynamics of the score or anything. You can just really, what is the orchestral dynamic for a passage like this? Right? What does it want to do? And what do you want to say in the limited amount of time that you're given, right? As an arranger, just doing the website evaluation sized entry. All right, so aside from all that, I like the first bassoon doubling the cello part, and I like the slurs on that. I think that's all fine, and I like the way that you broke up the slurs. Not too fond of this this da da da, but I like ta 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 ta. That's really, really cool. Da ta da ta. Right? So I think if you are not going to slur this, then don't slur this and this like that, or this, right? So if you really are going to go ta 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 ta, right? If you're not going to continue that kind of slurring across the strong beat or the downbeat, then don't do it here. There's just no need to. What if you slurred from here to there, right? Ta ta ta. It's a lot easier on the player. Not that it really makes that much of a difference. And then ta 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 ta. You know, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And then like this slurring here is imported from the piano part, right? So, you know, you broke it up here. So I would say either have it follow what the strings are doing, or just have the whole thing go cross all the way across. You know, ta ta. I just make it really smooth all the way across. But this is lovely. The bowing will be really, really great here. And then, yeah, so slurred accent. So that's all fine. But I don't really think you need that, because the player will just go 2 up bows here anyways, right? So they don't really need the slur. Okay. All right, but yeah, otherwise, really cool score. Thank you so much, Daniel. I really enjoyed looking at this. And yeah, I mean, all of these entries are making me feel really good today. And that's great, because this is my massive catch-up week when I'm doing all these evaluations. This will come out almost a full week after I have, so this is coming out on a Sunday, and I will be doing this on a Tuesday in New Zealand, which is Monday for the Western Hemisphere, so, and most of Europe, so anyway, really enjoying this, and I just really think it's a lovely score and a great effort and stuff. So yeah, please stick around for the next few orchestration challenges. I think you'll really get a lot out of them. On to the next score. This score is just so much fun. Thank you in advance before I add a bunch of suggestions and cautions and possible corrections. Thank you in advance, Jeff, for bringing this in. And I know that it was kind of tough organizing it. That, you know, we had some problems getting with getting it to me, and then like the format, and then some questions about some other things and so on. It's all, none of that really matters or makes any difference. You got me the score, and that's really what matters. So I'm just going to talk about a few notation things, and then we'll dig into scoring issues and so on. So right here, I don't know what format, what notation application you're using, but generally speaking, you would want a triple beam for this kind of tremolo, this kind of unmeasured tremolo, especially at a slower speed on Dante sostenuto, right? Because what this literally means would be to play things with repeated 16th notes. So da 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 da. So it's like it is a much slower kind of repeated note than just it's a very different kind of a thing. Now here, you should just tell us how long you want it to last. If you want the pitches to last till the end of this rest, then just write in the destination, tie it to the same pitches as half notes, and then that's fine. You do not need like these LV, let vibrate ties, the incompleted ties, you don't need it for such a short duration, right? And for this kind of instrument, glockenspiel, just right in the duration you want it to last. And I noticed there was like a problem with the timing here, and that's probably on my end because you send me the XML file, and then I ran it through Sibelius. So maybe Sibelius is not understanding the way that something about the format. Okay, so I'm just going to point out one thing because I'm not going to go into it. I'll be focusing on other things, but just to jump ahead here. Da da da. This is supposed to be a D, not a B, right? So it just really feels like that. I feel like with B, if you intended for this to be a B instead of a D, then it just doesn't feel like the peak of this phrase is really going anywhere. Whereas if it's a leap up to the D, you just really feel that, especially orchestrally, right? So that might be something you might want to go back over and change in your own entry, in your own files. All right. There's some other things to say on this page as well, but I'm going to jump back. There was one last thing. Oh, yeah. So here, the player does not need to change bows, right? This is not so long that violinists, violists, cellists could not play this all under one bow, including the fermata. And if they did feel there was a need to change bows, they would change them here, not here, right? Because it's just easier to, as everybody else is coming to an end here, to sneak in a bow change here is much less perceptible, especially if the first violinists are going to be bowing a down bow on this E, right? So it's just easier to sneak in that at least for the top divisi violist and for the second violinist, they can just really sneak in, and they can make it feel imperceptible too. Part of that has to do with legato bowing, right? So just the property of making everything feel smoothly connected. It can even make a tie feel like it's going on longer. But that said, there's absolutely zero reason for there to be a bow change here at all. So, yeah, so don't worry about that. And the other thing, too, is I mentioned in the previous evaluation about how, there's an exception to my dictum of just forget about putting in a tied, two tied dotted half notes in a row when all you need really is just a dotted whole note. So here you have poco ritardando coming in sort of right over the middle of the bar. So you might think, well, that could be a justification, couldn't it? But I don't know. But the conductor is going to be giving you this poco ritardando. It shouldn't be in every part, right? It should just be over the top. Same as like you don't have andante sostenuto in every part, right? You just have it over the top of the of the winds, and then here the strings. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I just was checking one little thing. All right. So, one last little detail. B flat versus A clarinets, it's always like the choice of which one to use. It's always a bit on the borderline when you are in G major. On the one hand, clarinets can play in reading A major with no problems, and any pro will be fine with it, and so on. However, if the music trends towards if the music trends towards sharps, then it's just easier for the clarinet player to be playing A clarinets. Now, of course, a lot of orchestras from semi-pro down to student and community and so on and so forth just do not have access to A clarinets, right? So you might be making B-flat clarinet parts anyway, right, for a piece, just to make sure that you have parts that the available clarinetists can play. Somebody left a comment under one of the videos, saying, well, I think that you should just stick with B-flat clarinets, XYZ, reasons. And that's all fine. I accept that point of view, but I just really see no issue to asking for an A clarinet if you are assuming that the situation is going to be a professional orchestra. Yeah, it just really, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to the player, but it makes things a lot easier to read, especially in a piece like this where, like, later on in the piece, which you didn't get to, so it's not really an issue, but later on in the piece, it's, there's sharp on top of sharp, right? There are lots of double sharps and so on. So, so it just, it's just a simpler thing, all in all. And better intonation, I would say. Or better native, less things to hassle around with. So, all right, so now let's talk about the scoring, right? Dynamically here, I do not think you need to do this. Piano in the winds and mezzo piano in your strings, and then mezzo forte in your violas, right? It just really is putting the focus of attention into places where, like, that aren't the melody, right? So I guess you'll crescendo up to mezzo forte here, but this will be crescendoing up to a forte, we assume, right? Or mezzo forte crescendo a little bit more, right? And then here, like, we have mezzo forte crescendo. Here we have mezzo piano crescendo, and then by the time we get to here, these notes here, these melody notes, which are being played tremolo in your violins, which are essentially like they're a background to the melody, the clearly delineated melody in your upper winds. They are so loud that they take away the meaning of the melody here, right? And what's more, we're sort of stuck with the whole question of, like, crescendo to what? What are we crescendoing to? And the same thing here, crescendo and then diminuendo. It's just not enough, at least for orchestra players. This is where pencil work would come into play, right? So pencil work, I mean, it's a common thing. It happens and stuff. But, like, what would be my level of professionalism? The least amount of pencil work possible in a rehearsal, right? I felt that I could just walk into it and there was almost no need to write anything on the scores unless there was something about the situation, like the choir that you're working with, has a need for things to be louder here or there because of the staging, right? So that's something that the orchestrator cannot control, right? So in a situation like this, somebody might even raise their hand and say, "Crescendo to what, sir?" To the conductor, right? And, like, it just might, let's just write a mezzo forte at the end of bar 8. Right? So it's just not these are kind of nebulous terms, right? If we don't have a destination, if we don't have a middle point. So anyway, yeah, and then, like, what does it mean when you have just three notes in a row, right? What does that crescendo mean? So it's better to really have just to continue, just make it up yourself, figure out where you want to go with that. Okay. All right. So clarinets, flutes, and octaves. See, here is a situation where having lower flutes is not a big problem because they're not so much in competition with anything else, right? Like horns or anything really radiantly sonorous. Except for the way you're pushing at these violas here and the way that you have the violins marked 1 degree louder, right? So if you just have everybody be the same volume, the same dynamic, volume's the wrong term, the same dynamic, the same level of strength, right? And here you say, two. So what do you mean by that? Do you mean 2 players? I don't quite understand. So if you mean 2 violinists, and then you're thinking, well, I have 2 violinists here, and I want to mark them a little louder because that way they'll balance with the flutes and so on, right? So, but I think A2 is the wrong language to use here, yeah. I would just say, like, one desk in Italian, right? One pupitre or whatever, right? So, I think that might be a better way, or just even write in English one desk, right? Or first desk, and that's a lot clearer. All right, but then like if you only have 4 violinists playing this, then this is way out of balance, right? Because you've got all these violists and all of these cello players, especially the cellists, playing in their tenor register, which is a bit stronger. But I mean, as far as like getting past all of that stuff, it's actually pretty well scored, right? You know, like the bare bones of what you're doing here are, you know, they work fine. I think that I wouldn't hold off on the violas so much here. I would actually have the violas just doubling what the clarinets are doing, and then they can stop here, and the cellos can take over and so on. But I mean, yeah, generally speaking, it pretty much works, right? Yeah, and I like the contrast with the oboes here, going to octave oboes as things get thicker, right? But then when you get into here, there's absolutely zero need for you to double second flute and first oboe here, right? The first oboe doesn't need any doubling. It is strong enough on its own, right? If you want to double it with something at you know, it should be doubled with another oboe, right? Because the second flute is not going to do anything, right? It's not. It is not going to contribute very much, if at all. You know, if we're thinking mezzo forte crescendo to forte, and let's say you fix everything so that everybody's the same dynamic, which it really should be. Does that mean, if that means we're getting towards a forte here, then that will especially obliterate your second flute here. So Jeff, I don't know what stage you came into this, how you heard about it, and what your what your relationship is to the Orchestration Online community. You know, whether you heard about it, you heard about this challenge this year, and you just jumped in, and you haven't really watched some of my other resources. But really, really worth watching is the the 12 common scoring errors, right? So that would clear up a lot of things, like using the piano style slurring over things, which kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you have repeated notes, right? How do they repeat the notes and slur with the same breath, right? Things like that. So a lot of those issues would be much clearer, I think. But I'm seeing other issues, things that I should clarify, and I'm almost thinking that maybe that video isn't really enough. Maybe I should just have a checklist, like, of people before you send me your score, blam 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 blam. Just go quickly down this list and just make sure that just a few things, just to make sure that, like, it doesn't sort of have me go over those points too many times, right? So, all right. So, generally speaking, aside from those little issues, right? It's a really workable. I think it's just nicely workable and stuff. I think that it would be nice if there were strings up here, like it wasn't just flutes and oboe on top. I think that if there was a little bit of doubling, like you could just have your second violinist play an octave here, right? Or you could just have them play up an octave, because the violas are already covering that E, and there's already plenty of weight on it as well, doubling with clarinet, right? So just little things like that. Yeah, and so there are a lot of these little commas, and I'm wondering if these are artifacts left over from exporting from a MIDI file. So yeah, if they're intended to be like pauses or breaths or whatever, you wouldn't need those over the course of a. I'm not really seeing anything that would, like, da, 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 da. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that would really need a breath, in terms of adjusting the rhythm or the pacing or anything like that. Okay, so going on to here, so what do you mean by having two notes under one slur, right? So, like, the slur is everything that the player is going to breathe over, right? So do you want the second one to be sort of like a from the stomach or something? Ta yeah. Or is it just an error, right? I mean, you might as well just make this into like a, just either not slur it or make it, maybe turn it into a quarter note or something like that. So here you say solo. If you mean like one player, then just write one, period. Because when you write solo, you are telling the conductor and the player that their part is going to stand out over the rest of the orchestra, right? Their part is important. The rest of the orchestra is going to have to be a framework around them, and that's not what I'm seeing here, right? This is more of an accompaniment part, right? And here the clarinet is joining in. So I think what you mean here is first player, right? It's just like a single player. So you would just write one period here, right? And then two, that's perfectly right, right? And then this is all perfectly fine, just like slurring everything under, in one breath, except like it really does cross a huge amount of territory by the time you get to the end. So the whole question is, do we really need this to be A2? So that's a really rich, rustic sound, a really solid sound. Can be very buzzy depending on the players you're working with. So what if you were to just divide this up between two players? Like had your second bassoonist play up to here, and then have your first bassoonist come in here on the E, right? And then you just do the same thing here, and then same thing here, just divide at the same place every single time, and then here, I would say divide from here. Just have your first bassoonist trading off, like having them dovetail, right? So in other words, the second player plays this note, and the first player picks up from this note and plays the rest of the figure, right? And I think that that's just a lot better, because that way, like, you can have your first bassoonist playing like all tenor clef register stuff, and your second bassoonist kind of reaching up into the tenor register. And that's just much, much stronger to trade off, rather than just having it one player all the way through. It's more of a concerto-like thing, to have this really long single slur on something crossing registers like that. Which, I mean, look, it happens. It's fine. An experienced professional can play that, and they might actually divide it without you realizing it. But yeah, it's just easier to split it up amongst the players. I mean, I would even do that here. I would say second bassoonist play the beginning, and then the first bassoonist play the end. Right? It's just easier. Now here you don't need to do that. I would just have this be first clarinetist. Then here you can come in A2. Now I don't know why you really need to be A2 here. It might be better for both. I think you'd get a more beautifully mixed sound if you had oboes and clarinets both playing, like doubling each other, playing harmony in each part, right? So in other words, like what this is scored, this is in the keyboard part, this would be a B third walking down to a G third and then jumping up to a C third, right? So why not just have both of those voices in your oboes, both of those voices in your clarinets? Then you get a way better moderated sound, rather than the oboe being oboe heavy on top and clarinet heavy on the bottom. So see, because here are the problems, right? Just to really get into the fine tuning of wind scoring. When you have A2 oboes, the oboe players are moderating their expression with each other, because it has to be a simpler kind of playing. Because if they are both very generous with their vibrato, their nuances, everything else, then it's really obvious that two people are playing, right? It's not a unified part. So they control things a little bit more, and that makes the part more trumpet-like. Whereas when you have two clarinetists on the same line, there's phasing, right? Because the clarinetists play without vibrato, so they're both playing as exactly right on the nose as they possibly can, like there isn't any kind of wavering of the pitch because of vibrato or anything else. So it is just really together, but there is no such thing as absolutely perfectly in tune, so you'll hear a kind of a phasing in there. So when you divide it up, though, when you have the oboes playing in thirds doubled by the clarinets playing in thirds, then you have this really rich, beautiful mixed sound. You can hear that in Tchaikovsky, especially like the last two symphonies. He does that a lot. He'll have like he kind of doesn't know what else to do, so he's got the flutes going nuts on the theme above, and then he's got the oboes and the clarinets doubling in thirds and sixths below, right? So check out some of that. And then like from here, you're running into some of the same problems. Poco poco crescendo from a mezzo piano, right? It was or piano. I'm not sure what's the dynamic here. All right, so we have this poco poco crescendo, and even just having this weight here of the oboes and clarinets playing this harmony right in between these two flutes is enough to kill the second flute. Of course, the second violins will just absorb it anyways, and then tracking from below, we've got the harmonies in the oboes and clarinets. From below, we've got the violas and thirds, and that's a beautiful idea. Look, the way it all stacks up is beautiful. It's just that the second flute is really kind of useless here. Like, it is not really contributing much to the sound. And here you have it doubling the oboe player, or the A2 oboe players, right? So the A2 oboes are also so powerful that the flute just doesn't really add a whole lot. And you are having your second violins jump up to this. So these three notes stuck together, or these three pitches stuck together in these winds are just completely devoid of any kind of doubling from the strings, so they'll stand out. So you have a very solid oboe note, very much buried second flute, right? So really just avoid this kind of scoring, like octave flutes. If you're already having your oboes, like A2 oboes, playing octaves below then have A2 flutes on top. That's perfectly fine. It really lends a lot of color and range and soaringness to your strings. So once again, just a prolificity of pause marks, of commas. You just really don't need those. And once again, just tell us how long you want the glockenspiel note to last. Right? That's all you need to do. I wouldn't give it a incomplete tie. But aside from all of that really fussy stuff that I just talked about, it's pretty good. It's pretty cool scoring. It's like there are a bunch of things like that I would want to adjust in it, right? Like there are a ton of stacked octaves right in here, where like there's almost no support here. Like after you finish playing this, you don't really come in to support what's going on here in this middle voice part. Like what are the clarinets doing? They're just kind of they're playing over parts that other players are already covering, right? And then here they come back to a harmonized part. So so they're just like the idea is strong, right? But the execution of it needs some adjustment. Is my conclusion, and I'm actually seeing that a lot. I'm seeing like a lot of like really strong ideas, but just like the way that is put together. So like the overall appearance is good, but like the architecture needs a little bit of work, right? But this is all really lovely. I would throw in a slur here, so down bow, up down, and then another slur here, up down, up down, up down, up down, and then here the player would probably do two up bows, up down, or it could even be down, up, and then a second up bow. So there's like a bunch of different ways of dealing with this, but like that's the decision you get to make. I would also slur these right in here, these little thirds, da, rather than da da da. And I would also support them with the clarinets, who are kind of not really doing anything all that important, right? And then just don't do these flute octaves. They're not really doing anything, right? Just do A2 above. If you need an octave right in here and you want to, there are ways of bringing in. I mean, you already have got your second violins in there, so it's sort of immaterial. You don't really need the second flute on that. It's not really doing anything anyways, right? So, all right. So those are my impressions of your score, Jeff. And of course, I could, if this were an orchestration lesson, we could take a bunch of things apart, and then you could go and fix them and bring them back, and then you might come back the next week with a completely different idea, and so on and so forth. So, but I mean, I don't really have that much time to be a teacher anymore these days. I think just being a coach is fine, and and exercising that coachiness in these challenges every year is all I really need besides my other career of doing stuff. So anyway, so thanks so much for this really cool entry, and I'm so glad that we were able to straighten out whatever problems there were, and that we were able to get this score going and a functional mock-up. And if the mock-up isn't exactly the way that you have it on your equipment, I apologize. But at least I'd say it's a pretty good impression as mock-ups go. Okay. So thanks heaps, Jeff. Thanks so much for being part of this, participating, and everybody who was listening up to here, just give Jeff some good feedback. And same thing with Alex and Daniel and the orchestrators to come. And speaking of which, let's go take a look at the next score. Hey there, Eric. That is, I just got such cool ideas. All right, so just a few pointers about preparing your score for the next orchestration challenge, which I really hope you'll be involved with. I'm really trying to get everybody who was involved this year to be involved for the next 3 years, because oh man, we just have it's going to be so cool. I mean, you might have heard me already talking about it, but you have a choice of 2 different options, and a really different scoring style than what we're used to in coming up, and then there's going to be a really gorgeous piece by the following year by a composer very famous for another style of music, and then we're going to have this massive orchestration palooza in the third following year. So there's just tons of stuff, and I can just really see just all of the different options that are going to be available, like just inviting you to score and explore and come up with really cool ideas, just like you did with this one. All right, so I'm going to give you some pointers, because since I'm really trying to plan for you to be a long-term participant. All right, a few tips about preparing your score. One is just leave out the piano staves. We don't need them, right? And if you do leave them out, then we can bring up the size of each page, right? So like I could increase the view very, very easily here, right? And then the material on it would be much larger and just easier to point out. Another thing is, if you could, then whatever application you may be using, hit the transpose button, right? So it puts everything into the correct transposition. And so, for instance, with E flat clarinets, right? That I would see the key signature here of I guess of A flat major, and yeah, and then here for the horns, they would be an F, right? And if there was a key signature, it would be D major. But then I would want you to correct the bass clef to a treble clef, because the pitches would be seen up a perfect fifth, right? And just they make a whole lot more sense in treble clef. All right, so if you could just do those things for me as you go along, right? Now, another thing that I'm just going to really invite you to do in your future efforts, orchestrationally, is to go ahead and just really feel free to use more pitches, right? Like here, I'm just going to jump ahead. Like pretty much the only instrument above the strings that is playing more than one pitch are the horns, right? And like, how many of each do you mean? How many flutes? How many oboes? How many clarinets? Right? How many horns? You have to tell me how many, right? So if this is two flutes, then couldn't the flutes be playing harmonies, or maybe they could be playing A2, right? I mean, there's a bunch of different options. Now, having said that, that is a really beautiful oboe sound. It's almost like an English horn, and almost like I thought to myself, wow, what a great English horn part. And I looked at it and said, oboes. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. All right, so really, like, tell us how many of each, right? You don't have to do that for the strings or anything, but leave out the piano. Tell us how many of each. Feel free to use more harmonies, like more parts playing in, if you have two oboes, use them, right? They could be doing different things. They could be playing harmonies. They could be thickening. They could be playing more of a harmonic role. If you have more voices than you think, then you are freer to do more things, right? So, all right. So that's basically, and also, like, tell us who you are, right? Let us know who arranged this. Put your name over here. ARR period by your name, right? So yeah, so those are just a few pointers, because just seriously, just looking at the wonderful ideas you had here. Okay, yeah, one last tip. All right, and that is right here. You have triangular note heads for your timpani. Just don't do that. Just use standard note heads, right? The timpanist doesn't need them. The conductor doesn't need them. The score reader doesn't need them, and you don't need them. Okay, just write in standard note heads. That's 99.9999999999993% of the parts the timpanist is going to read in a professional orchestra are just going to have standard note heads, right? So just give them standard note heads. And then here, like, you have the ripply line and gliss. I think you could just have a straight line. You don't really need the ripply line. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about the scoring. All right, this is really a beautiful way to start. And you're going down here to a simple E fifth. But you know that, like, the chord here is actually a G6 chord, right? Not a G6-4 or 6-3 chord, but a G6 chord. So in other words, like a G chord, like, just think of the chord of G, B, and D with an E stuck on top, right? So it's like a jazz chord. All right, so if you were to have the notes below it be a G and a B, and then this E on top, right? And then it's just missing the fifth of the D. Right? So if this were a G and a B, then it would be more in line with that beautiful, ambiguous harmony, the impressionist harmony, right? It's like one of the things that's cool about the beginning of this piece is he's not telling you where he's going exactly, right? Okay, so, but I mean, of course, if you want to end with this, like, on a much more somber note with the horns, that's fine. All right, now you have really widely different dynamics in a bunch of parts at the beginning here. And that's what I call dynamic mixing, okay? So it's sort of treating the dynamics in the orchestra a little bit like a mixing board, right? You're pulling the slider back, pulling the fader back on the horns, pulling it way back on the strings, pushing it forwards on the oboes and the flutes and so on and so forth. And to a degree, some of that mixing can be justified. Like, for instance, if you have scoring that's fairly close together like this, where the strings and the winds and the brass are all sort of on top of one another, then it can make a good sense to bring back the volume of your bring back the dynamic of your brass a little bit, right? So maybe crescendo to mezzo forte instead of forte. However, like, the more you dynamically mix and tweak and make everybody's part a different dynamic, the more separated everything becomes rather than unified, right? So yeah, so I mean, like, building textures with really soft violins in the background and like pizzicato coming forward and so on and so forth. I mean, I get what you're trying to do here, but I'm just wondering whether it's really all that necessary. Do you know what I mean? Could the strings have just been piano? Could you have started out with your oboe, piano crescendo, and then picked it up, crescendo to mezzo forte, and then picked it up from the flutes, mezzo forte, and then diminuendo going up, right? And then adding more nuances as you went along, and then eventually pushing forward to a forte, like a solid forte towards the end. Could the strings have added more support from below, right? Now, I like the idea of marking the harp up a little bit. That's the flip side of marking the brass down when it's in close proximity, right? So if the violins were marked down to triple P because they were burying the harp, well, I mean, that is a consequence of scoring harp right on top of strings. So you could bring up the dynamic of the strings here and just have the harp play an octave higher, right? I like the whole idea of not having the grand staff for the harp, but like, there's a lot of time when the harp really just doesn't need it at all, and the harpist might be playing the whole thing with just one hand, right? There are little touches and bits and pieces, and oftentimes when there isn't that much vertical space to spare, I will definitely just have a single staff of harp, because really that's just even when I start my glissando like on a high note in the treble clef and ended on a low note in the bass clef, I might just score that out on one staff. I love the idea of you going downwards instead of upwards. I think that you could even give yourself, like, seeing as how this is a slower tempo, you could even give yourself more pitches to cross. You could have maybe started from E an octave higher down to this low E, or actually this E down to the E below, and then just change to a bass clef in the middle of this, right? In which case it's just so much easier to use a straight line. It gets in the way a lot less and confuses things visually a lot less. All right. Yeah, I mean, it's just some really, really great stuff going on in here. Yeah, and yeah. Yeah, and then there's just this little dive down to E here. Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder whether or not this would be better off, like, seeing as how separated it is, right? It's this low sound below everything else. It might be better if this were tuba rather than bass trombone, because bass trombone has a very, very trebly, very kind of a harsher sound, right? Whereas tuba has this more, it has a sort of a bigger, deeper, more embracing sound, right? And I just think that might work better. Of course, like in terms of unity, right? Having these parts working together 2 octaves apart, it really does make more sense for this to be bass trombone rather than a tuba. But I mean, it would still work fine with a tuba in terms of everybody else in the orchestra, right? Who's got to play along. All right, so now moving to here, you just here wistfully, jauntily. Okay, so is there any kind of retardando here? Like, are you like here? You got a fermata, or is the music slowing down a little bit? In which case, do we need a tempo here, or do we need to go faster? I actually felt the need to go faster here. Like it's really separated. Like when you go very slow and you have a big row of staccatos or pizzicatos or whatever. You know, I mean, it really just seems a little unnatural, a little mechanical, right? But what if it were a little faster, like, you know, I just like feel that, you know, even though you don't want this to be flowing, you want it to be more punchy. I still feel that it could go quite a bit faster if you're going to take this approach, all right? So watch out for that. Now, in terms of the scoring, I thought it was really fun. You know, I love the idea of the bassoons and it working together with a staccato double bass, and you know, I sort of miss the whole idea of like the middle voice, right? So it just seems to be. All right, so this was one of the things that I pointed out in the Pitfalls video. Did you watch that, Eric? So like the whole idea that like the left-hand pattern is interacting with the middle voice, right? And when they're separated, then we lose the sense of continuity, right? And so that's what we're kind of feeling, like these rests, right? They don't connect to. I mean, there are things that are part of the middle voice, right? You know, the C and the D here. We've got that in the trumpet and so on. But the pizzicato, the staccato here isn't connecting with these pitches, right? So what if there were staccato notes on some of the, you know, on like this? There was a staccato C and a staccato D, right? What if this were being spelled out? This C third and this D third were also being, you know, finding a place in the pizzicato pattern, right? And then the same thing here, right? So this, like in the piano part, it's da da ba, right? It's da da ba. So, but here you just have the da, right? So this da pluck da, or it's not a. I keep thinking it's pizzicato, da, da staccato da. But okay, and this is also a strange thing. All right, so all right, to move on to another topic. You've got this staccato in the middle of a slur, right? So, I mean, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? How do you do that? Did you maybe mean something more like da, and then landing on this ta, or did you mean da, da? Did you mean this to sort of be like a little push with the gut or something like that? Like a portato or something? It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense the way that it's scored. And then here you've got that same thing. You've got like staccato with a slur over it, right? So repeated notes under a slur, right? How does that work? And here we have, like with this, I'll cut you some slack. This is the original slurring from the piano part, which didn't end up in your piano score here. Okay, so like. I don't know if you watched the 12 common scoring errors, but this is another one. It's just dropping the piano part or the piano slurs onto the wind and string parts, right? So, I mean, a really long, you end up with having the string players have less control over what they're doing because their bows are so long. The wind players, you know, they end up having these really, you know, a lot of times the slurring makes more sense for the piano player than it does for the wind player, right? So, I mean, here and there you're working things out. Like for instance, here, like you're conscious of the fact that, you know, that like you don't want to put a slur over a repeated note. But what about here then, right? So yeah, so you might need to edit that a little bit, right? But just think in terms of like if you were bowing this, right? Wouldn't you want to go down, up, up bow, down bow, and then here you have like repeated notes. So wouldn't you want to go up, down, right? So why slur across there? And how about up, down, instead of the slur here? Up, down. So anyway, just rethink some of this, okay? Because like you're very attentive to all these other details, but you're not attentive to that detail. Like you should be, right? You should make the decision, not leave it up to the player, because a lot of times, like in a situation, say like you gave this to a community orchestra or a semi-pro orchestra, the concertmaster is going to go through and they're going to just get rid of a lot of these really long slurs anyways and just put in shorter ones. So why shouldn't you make the decision instead of them, right? Of what the way that you want to shape the phrase. Yeah, but I still don't quite get what you mean there with the staccato in the middle. All right. So, and this is kind of cool, just like using little bits and pieces. Really be aware that, like, if everybody's playing mezzo forte, so I guess this is forte left over from before, but it's kind of strange that there are no nuances here in your flute part, and then it usually basically just stays loud, even though everybody else kind of gets loud under them. Right, but the flute part is low enough to where some of the especially like the trumpet part right in here will have a tendency to sort of play over it a little bit. The overtones will tend to be a bit prominent there, and then of course like you've got the string parts playing all over. They're sort of interacting and weaving in and out there, right? So it's just really a lot going on here to. With the against what is being scored here in the winds. Okay, but we're focusing on this. So just really just shorten your slurs, right? And then maybe have a more connected, like you can stick with the staccatos, but just incorporate the other parts of the middle voice into it. And I think it would just sound way. I mean, smoother is the wrong word. It would have better continuity, right? And then there are ways that that your second wind players could be supporting what's going on, right? So it doesn't have to just be one player, right? Because like here you got D and F sharp playing an octave apart, but it's really only the oboes that are covering that, right? So couldn't like your second bassoonist be playing these two down here, and then maybe your first bassoonist come in and play the this part doubling the cellos or something? I mean, there could be ways of supporting it that make it stronger. All right, and then just kind of same comments going ahead with this, right? Okay, so one last thing is like you have clarinets in E flat, right? So. Yeah. So the thing about it is that these pitches here that you're asking for in your E-flat clarinets are in its Chalumeau register, right? And the Chalumeau register of the E-flat clarinet is kind of, I mean, I don't want to say a joke. I mean, it has a certain beauty to it, but it has a very shallow sound, and sometimes it's used to sort of make fun of bad clarinet playing, right? So like the like Strauss, for instance, would score things that were in the Chalumeau register, like that on a standard B flat clarinet would sound beautiful, but on a E flat clarinet they sound like a mockery, right? So in terms of like timbral balance, for instance, like what you've got here with these beautiful, rich flutes and oboes right in their sweet spot, being played, playing, I guess, an octave below here in the E-flat clarinet, an octave below the flute, it will really have and then kind of joining together here, it just really will not have a beautiful, rich sound. I think maybe you mean B flat clarinet here, right? That's just a way better choice, or even an A clarinet would be good here, right? And then here you have your horns climbing, and then right here you're jumping up to these higher pitches right in here, right? So this is a sounding G third, right? Which on the horn will be a D third at the top of the treble staff. So that means that there's going to be a high F sharp up there, right? So that high F sharp is going to have a tendency to just shout over everybody else, what everybody else is doing here. The high written F sharp. So it'll just really start to take control, right? Whereas, like, and you're, it's basically, it's crossing the trumpet part, right? The trumpet player could play D thirds up there, or trumpets in C, right? So you could easily have two trumpet players up there playing mezzo forte or even mezzo piano. Like, they could be playing this really softly and blending in with everything instead of just blasting them all to hell, right? Which is what you want to avoid. But I like, having said all of that, here I'm sort of picking this to pieces, Eric, but like I like a lot of what you're doing here. It's like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is bad or this doesn't work. I mean, making it work, taking your idea and making things work, right? That's the important thing. Like, these pitches right in here, these are more like trombone pitches, right? So why can't the trombone be playing this, and then, like, when when you want to go for something higher, like have your have this played by your trumpets. You already have that G already right here, right? So just adding a B on top of it, it's just very, very playable. And then you don't end up with that higher, more focused, intense sound from the horns, right? The higher you push the horns, the more they want to sort of take over what's there. I mean, unless the heavy brass are playing over them, in which case they disappear. But in a situation like this, where you really want everything to balance and you're really trying to keep everything carefully controlled, right? Now here's another example of how E flat clarinet. This is why, like, I got to this and I said I have to go back and talk about E flat clarinets. So here you have E flat clarinet playing in octaves with the flutes, right? And what is your style here? It's sort of like, post-romantic. Maybe a kind of a sort of a romantic early 20th century Eastern European style of scoring with some impressionist influences and so on and so forth. Okay, that's great, but you put flute in octaves with E flat clarinets playing in their Chalumeau registers, and you get like a Stravinsky sound, right? This is kind of a different kind of post-romantic sound, right? So if this is clarinets, you get a big, beautiful, round sound and kind of glows. But with the clarinets, it's just really, like E flat clarinets, is really weak, right? So just think B flat. Maybe you hit the wrong key. Well, the E key is very far away from the B key on the typewriter, but on the typewriter keys, but just rethink that, because there are ways of bringing E flat clarinet into this, and I actually used an E flat trumpet in mine for a specific kind of an effect. But just watch out, all right? Just really get to know a lot about that E flat clarinet before you score it in a situation like this, where B flat clarinet, it would just totally shine and sound beautiful. Okay, so those are my comments, and I think you would get a lot out of the evaluations for other website entries, like the other ones on this video and the two before and the ones that are going to come. So really focus on those, and also some of the more extended Patreon entries. And if that whets your appetite for a longer entry next time, you're perfectly welcome to support on Patreon the next time around, or come hang out with us on Patreon anytime you like. And that, of course, that invitation extends to all the viewers, if you want some of that content or so on. But like, this isn't an advertisement for Patreon at all. I don't intend that to be. But anyways, I see a lot of promise in this, and in all of the scores in this group, and there's just I'm just saying, like, do not get discouraged by me critiquing this and pulling this apart and saying, this doesn't work maybe, and so on and so forth. Just put that all in the machinery for next time, and see what like, with that feedback and the other feedback you're going to get from people below in the comments, see what you can build out of that for take two on this, right? And just feel if you feel that's up to your satisfaction. I won't be able to look at it because I can't do retakes on these scores, but like, maybe the score will make more sense to you, right? So or we'll clear up some questions that you had, right, of your own that I may or may not have answered. So anyways, like, just keep at it, all right? I really I love what you're doing here, and I really enjoyed this. So on to the next score. Really solid work there, Michael. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have been involved with these challenges before. I seem to recall. It's just all a big blur at this point. But, I think you've picked up a lot of sort of my lessons about balance and about the sections working together. And I think a lot of the choices that you're making make a lot of sense, right? So there are greater issues at play, right? And it's actually great that I'm able to get a score where I can talk about some of those issues. This is not to say that any entry is better or worse than any other, but it's just that some offer different opportunities for me as your moderator, as your coach here. So, does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? So to the extent that you are filling things in a little bit more with doubling, like you start off with just strings, and then you start to add more weight with your winds, and eventually more horns, and so on and so forth. So if there is a critique that I could make here, I felt that over the course of the phrase, there could have been more contrast of texture that would lend more meaning to the progression of the music, right? So, whether that is highlighting certain sections, like more winds in one, more, less winds in another, or more brass here or there, or more individualized instruments in one section as opposed to more tutti in another, right? I think that would be a way of bringing more life into a passage like this. So, and that, by the way, like, that is absolutely zero to do with whether or not you scored this effectively, because you did. I felt it was, like I said, it's really solid work, right? You're obviously thinking about things like bowing, right? We've got a down, down, up, down, up, and so on. Like you really work those out. That's fantastic, right? There are a few things, one or two bits on the next page where I might, say, oh well, you might have forgotten to do X, Y, Z, but but generally speaking, I would say, yeah. But like, um, and then, here, like, since you took so much effort with the strings, couldn't we have had something similar to that with the flutes? Maybe you could have slurred up across the downbeat, but then you miss the unity of the beginning of a bow stroke with tonguing, right? Which that would bring. It doesn't have to slur all the time. It could be tongue, tongue, right? Tongue, tongue, ta-tongue, tongue. Then maybe slur here, tongue, tongue, right? So anyway, so just think about like having more unity in your phrasing between strings and winds. Like, I know that like you could just put a big slur over everything and say, oh, we'll just let the player decide. But then that takes the decision away from you, right? The way that you would want to shape this as an orchestrator of some experience, right? And then also the whole question of slurring over repeated notes, right? Well, I'm not going to get into that because I've already talked about it too much in this video, but there are just some nice stuff. There's some nice stuff in here. The bassoons coming in, just the horns helping carry through those kind of suspended notes from below, and then the horns coming in here, helping out in a way with what's going on with the clarinets, and it's just some nice solid stuff. But like, could we have really pushed into some of this so that, because the dynamic really just kind of doesn't go anywhere, right? Like piano, we got a little bit of a nuance here, and then it's back to piano and a little nuance and a crescendo to what, right? So it's the same problem that I might have mentioned. So you're saying, okay, mezzo piano. Well, you got to tell everybody else, right, that we're going to a mezzo piano, but even that doesn't really dig you out of the hole of everything kind of sounding like not really, there isn't a big expressive lift, right? And if you listen to the piano part, there's so much expression and nuance and changes of color, even just in this prologue, right? So capturing that, I think, is like the goal. So, so it's I think you have to take the harder path, right? And just see how much more than you could wring out of it, even if it's just pushing up to a forte here, right? Now, right in here, you could hear that the harp is just really buried. Like all of this is really inaudible, and part of that is because you've got horns in here, and you've got clarinets, and you've got absorptive sounds, and you have the harp trying to play across that. Even marking it up to mezzo forte is not going to help. I would say having it play like maybe an octave or two higher, right? Then you would hear the function of the harp clearly over the rest of the music. Yeah, I mean, I love this right in here, the descending oboe and the way that the clarinet hangs on while the second goes under it, and the function of the horns in here, and the holding on to these sounding E's and everything else. That's just really, it's just such a nice score. I mean, it really does. It's really well put together, right? I mean, crossing the downbeat, like, don't get into a place where there's like nobody tongues on the downbeat. All right, but I mean, it's really cool. It holds together. It works, right? So, so what can you do even more, right? Ask yourself, right? How can you make this even more remarkable, right? How can you bring out more colors? How can you maybe like have almost like a question and answer between groups of instruments, or between levels of dynamic, or between drama and, like tension and release, or drama and tranquility. Okay? But like having said that, that's pretty cool. I mean, I would probably opt for even, for things like, maybe slurring half a bar, right? So slurring to here with one, and then here, like doing a slurring over like a portato or something like that. Just to, kind of have more unified up bow, down bow, up bow kind of patterns, rather than down, up, if possible. But I mean, but like this, like to say like, is there anything really wrong with this? Not really all that much, you know. I mean, I would adjust some of the slurring and the winds and so on. But like, yeah, great work, Michael. All right, so next page. All right, so here we get into some more intense stuff. Now you really are keeping things soft still. So like here the danger I would say is that we have we have a lot of similar texture to what happened on the previous page, right? So what is the big change is like the interpretation of like the flowing left hand pattern, right? So you've made some really cool choices, and I'll talk about them in a minute, right? But but overall, this idea of the upper winds and the strings kind of playing very much just doubling everything. That's kind of what happened on the previous page, right? So what can you bring new to this, right? So if what about this, Michael? What if the previous page, had really differentiated, like passages of, instruments, like kind of more stripped down, working together, less doubling, and so on and so forth. And then you started with this, right? Then this would be like a new color, right? Now here you do not need to say divisi in 2 or or whatever. It's absolutely they will understand how much divisi they'll be in, right? I think it's more like when you have things like maybe you'll have double stops in one voice, and then the other voice will be maybe carrying a melody under it or over it. Then like when you say divisi in 2, right? Then the player says, oh yeah, right. So one group is playing double stops here, the other group is playing the melody or whatever, right? It's because otherwise they might say, oh well look, divisi in 3 because look at the interval. So some people will be playing, some string players will be playing the top part of that interval, others the bottom, and then maybe like we'll just divide that between half of the desks, and then the other half of the desk are going to be playing the melody, right? So it's all the mechanics, all the mathematics are something that you can sometimes leave up to the concert master. Will have more experience on how to do that. All right. And some of these things do not need to be divisi. Like for instance here, you could get away with asking non-divisi here on this F sharp third, right? That's like one of the easiest double stops you could play because the A can be open, right? And then here, the G can be an open string with an E on top, right? So these pitches right in here could be non-divisi. All right. So, but let's focus on the scoring, okay? I'm having a tendency to kind of get lost in some of the details, which are important, but yeah. All right, so yeah, really wonderful trick in here of having the harmonized melody in the oboe and flute, and then octaves in the violins. So yeah, and that's just a perfect way of making it sound like there's a real full, rich string chord above when it really is in the winds. Yeah, so I mean, just really, really great different approaches that you're using in here. And the English horn playing harmony inside the violin octaves and so on. Yeah, just really, really cool ideas. And then the bassoons kind of picking up some of the harmony from below. It's going to have a beautiful, rich sound right in here. All right, and and the viola's covering some of that as well. All right, so like the first 4 bars here, just really wonderful interpretation of the melody and the harmony that goes with it, right? And then here, we're kind of coming up and sort of playing into what's happening here. And I would say that the piccolo is completely unnecessary till you get to this E. Right? I would just don't even bother bringing it in. Or you could just have them play it just to play it and warm up their lips and then play this E, but just being aware that this A is not really going to contribute much of anything to the music, especially not with the doubling and the strings. All right. But once that E is solitary and alone and you're going up to the A, wow, everybody is going to be able to hear the piccolo. Just suddenly it's going to stand out. And then when you go up to the D, that is going to be very, very audible. But otherwise, like, the approach is really similar, right? The harmony inside the octave being played by the strings. So right in here, I think there's just, I don't think there's any reason here to have this B in here. You would be better off having a G third in your oboes and then A2 flutes on this E right in here. Right? You just get a way better sound. And then you can go back to this approach that you have before. But I would just say here, like, even the B, it's a little, and some of these E octaves here as well. I would say, seeing this, even with pianissimo horns right in there, I would say with the bassoons in close proximity and some of this middle voice stuff happening and so on, it's just better to have A2 E's there and then have the G and the B doing the harmony inside, right? It just works better. Right, and then the English horn on the low E. All right, so yeah, and then this is going to be beautifully radiant, and I love the way that, like, you're letting the middle voice starts to emerge in the function of the second violins more and more, right? And so I think that's great. I mean, it would have been great to include the way that you went on, obviously, right? Because that was really, really strong where you were headed. So, but anyway, it's all good. But there's some wonderful control here on the dynamics. Piano, melodia ben la melodia ben cantando, and then and then poco a poco crescendo to mezzo forte here. I would say that right in here, you start off with a moderated dynamic, which is good, pianissimo here, and also like the heavy brass pianissimo, right? And then you have like your single trumpet is piano, right? So, I mean, why couldn't you go all the way up to a forte here, right? I mean, just because it's, mezzo forte in the score, right? You could go all the way up to a forte here, and then everybody else just leave the brass section and the timpani where it is, right? And I think that this would just shine, just have a beautiful shining color. All right, now let's talk about the bass and the accompaniment part, right? And bring in more talk about what's happening in the brass. All right, now the harp is just completely lost right in here. It's barely, if everybody were playing pianissimo and the harp were marked mezzo forte, then you would sort of hear. But like any low pitches in the harp just get swallowed up unless there's something about the architecture that makes a huge space for them. But there isn't, because even just the addition of these notes, right, timpani and then the double bass right in here is just going to eat up what's happening there in the harp, right? So I know you want this harp to add some emphasis to what's going on with everybody else, but it doesn't have that. It doesn't have that power. So you could mark it up like an octave or two or something like that, but I think it wouldn't play the role that you want it to. So, like, what if you were to do this instead? What if you were to go pizzicato, first voice, right? Arco, second voice. So pizzicato, pluck, pluck, and then arco on the third note. Right? So pluck, pluck, arco. And then I think that would pretty much do what you want the harp to do, right? I think you would get you'd get that punctuation. You wouldn't get it on the third note, but I mean, maybe it's superfluous. All right, and then like having the tuba come in here, it's a beautiful note to go pianissimo on. I think that really works great. And then just and then this E right in here. I think that all works pretty well together. And that, like, contrabassoon, and then bass clarinet, right? And so it's all sort of leading up into these patterns, and I think that they're nicely spread across the stringed instruments. And So here is what I was going to possibly have an issue with was, slurring across the bar right here. And it's not really that big of an issue. I mean, I know what you want here is to just have everything be really smooth across everything, right? And as far as that's concerned, you could easily slur like this, like just slur D, D, F sharp, right? I think that would work fine. I don't think you need to go D, D, F sharp. Although it, slur is a lot easier, right? But I mean, I think that it just works fine if you just slur the whole thing, and then everything connects a little bit more. Because you do want that sense of connectedness, right? And we're seeing that in other parts. So go ahead and I would say just go ahead and slur right there. Now this, I would say go ahead if you're going to do it. The purist in me wants you to just stop the slur here and then just give a little bit of, like, even if this is leading across here to make things smoother, I still feel the need for a break in the slur, but it's fine. You don't have to follow my advice. I'd say that the way that you got it scored is okay, just so long as like it doesn't go overboard. See, the problem is like it's leading towards that idea in everything, right? And then you end up with a difference in articulation. Like you have 3 different articulation styles going on here. 4, right? So you have one that's going da 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 ba, right? And here you're going ta 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 ta, or ta 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 rest, right? And then here you're going ta ta, and here you're going ta, right? What are you saying here? I think you should have 2 different styles. You should have ta 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 ta, and you should have ta rest or ta pa, ta ta. Same thing. Like this is setting you up for this. That's the problem with this. I'm reminding myself now. And then here, like it's like you're unsure. Like here you're going ta ta ta, and then here it's ta, right? So make up your mind. Use one. Like I like this approach right in here with the horns. I think that that's the way to go. They should all be marked that way, I feel. So maybe like go ahead and slur across the first time, but maybe not the other times, just because it's just sort of the way that you're setting yourself up for a differentiation in the slurring patterns. And it just leads to a lack of unity, and it just becomes more confused rather than sort of sleek, right? Now here, if you just really must have incredibly smooth winds over your strings, it might be better just to like have just one big long slur, right? But anyway, I mean it's all right, the way that it's scored, it's okay. But I'm starting to see so many instances of the piano slurring transported into the score that I'm just kind of reacting to it maybe a little too much. But yeah, I really, once again, I love the scoring of the slurs in the string part for the most part. Yeah, really nice. And then like these, these kind of, I almost feel like, couldn't these this heavy brass right in here have like floated along? Like, what if it were slurred staccato, or what if it were portato, right? Just a really soft portato, right? Da 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 da, right? Rather than tun 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 tun, right? Just kind of give them a little bit of a curve there. Ta 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 ba, right? And the other instruments. Here I'm a little conflicted because of the motion, right? Like you carry this across here, but there's motion in the clarinets, bassoons, and middle strings, right? So that motion is getting blotted out, and then the horns, and that's motion is getting blotted out a little bit by the repetition in the heavy brass, right? But then here you have it follow. So look, just stop repeating everything and just follow the curve, I would say. Right? Maybe that overstresses the middle voice, but then maybe you don't need so many voices on that middle voice. Yeah, but just like really beautiful harmonies and chords here. Like this is going to be wonderfully radiant, but the way that you've scored it, it really will play over the middle winds right here and the middle strings. So So, yeah, I mean, to follow my advice, you know, just keep the sections, keep the winds and the strings in front, basically. Crescendo up to a forte, starting pianissimo here, and it's fine just to have like the trumpet at piano, but only crescendo for everybody up to a mezzo forte. And then I think that you would just see this really shine just beautifully, just have a wonderful color to it. Yeah, and this is just really lovely writing here, trading off to the second clarinet and so on. Yeah, just really great work, Michael. I mean, I don't want you to feel bad by me saying, oh, like, yeah, have you tried having a different, having differentiating your approaches on the first page and things like that. But, I really do think that just, our job here is to listen to what Violina is doing and to try to match that in expressiveness, right? Like, if we possibly can, because that's sort of like the pinnacle is the interpretation. But that's my approach. I mean, somebody will come here and say, oh, well, throw away everything Violina did, throw away everything that Barvinsky intended, but just take the fabric of it and just make, instead of making a tapestry that that resonates with the imagination of the composer, we're going to make a strange box out of aluminum, right? But it still is the same material, right? The same basic shape. So, I mean, I'm not going to judge you on this or that, because I think I think the scoring is really solid. But if there's any way of having a little bit of ebb and flow and contrast of color and so on in the prologue, then I would go for it, right? But like this second page, there's just so many cool things about it. I could talk about it all day, except we have one more score in this series of evaluations. So I'm just going to thank you once again for being, participating in this challenge, and just, invite you to stick with it at least for the next 3 challenges. What am I doing to myself? No, I'll get through all these scores. It's just, I'm really enjoying this. I just have to check my energy levels. So yeah, so much fun. Thank you so much for such a cool score. And now on to our very last evaluation for this compilation of website entries. Right, Ramsay's, great to get an entry from you this year. It's really great to have you involved with this, and to see how you are developing as an orchestrator and everything else. Your entry looks great this year, and I mean, you probably could have even divided this into 2 separate pages and stretched things out a little bit rather than crowding them so much horizontally. But it's all fine. I can totally work with this. So there are a bunch of separate issues. Okay, so I'm going to break them down into different little bite-sized pieces. But 2 things are really fresh in my mind right now, and one of them is the harp. Okay, so I think that the harp, for the way that you have balanced it out with the strings, I think is going to work fine here. Okay, and of course we are assuming that these are pitches played, right? Not pitches sounding. And if that is the case, then this is all going to work fine. And in fact, that's kind of what I heard in the mock-up. Sometimes it's hard to tell in a mock-up what the what harmonics are intended. Now, it seems to me that like there's something in your notation software that is making some of these pitches play harmonically, like they have the harmonic sound to them, rather than just normally plucked strings. So that's something you might want to watch out for. It was just a little too porcelain, kind of delicate in kind of chiming sounds in a lot of these pitches. So just watch out. That's probably what it is. It's just some of it is still set to the harmonic playback. Okay, so the question is like, how much is this really rational, like in terms of like how much is this usable? What will be heard? So in terms of like the mock-up, you could hear the harp pretty well, right? And you're pushing the harp all the way up to fortissimo and so on. But I would say, realistically speaking, as soon as the horns came in here, the harp was pretty much toast, right? And it would be better for you just to use pizzicato in say, second voice cellos or something like that. Just some other kind of plucking sound in there, or have your harp playing higher, right? Some of it sort of really kind of takes over the music a little bit, like this big gushing arpeggio and so on and so forth. It won't be easy to hear this in front of mezzo forte horns and forte winds playing over some of the same pitches. But the other problem too is just like it's, if you can hear it, it's sort of like, hey, listen to this harp right here. Whereas what's the actual function is going up to this D, right? So what if the harp was to actually get all the way up to that D and everything was scored an octave higher? Right, then I think the harp would just be effortlessly more easy to hear. But I think the balance here is right. Since you're having your winds and horns play in really close proximity, really the solution is for the horns to be down a little bit. But I think you could even start as soft as piano here. All right, so now let's talk about your solo strings. So I think you're missing an opportunity here. You could have had just solo first violin and solo second violin, right? The solo first violin taking the top pitches here, and the solo second violin taking the lower pitches. Or you could have had this scored the way that it is for your first violins, and then have your second violins take the top voice of the violas, and actually much more natural, going all the way up to this high A, and then you could just leave the violas in like the lower voice of the viola would be like just like one solo violist, one solo second violinist taking that top part, because it's like this, that F is no big deal to read. So, I mean, I just feel that would work a whole lot better and be a lot more natural. Yeah, two soli, unison, divisi. I don't think you have to keep reminding us that this is two soli and two divisi and so on. You've said that here, right? Until you say tutti, then we know that this is all soli, right? So just say unison, divisi, right? That's all good. All right, but I have kind of the same comments here that I did about Michael's score before, and that is, what more could you have gotten out of this prologue, rather than having everything scored, just in solo strings, right? Because we have very little in the way of dynamic contrasts. You don't get very loud, right? So we don't have that. We don't have that as the sound, the timbre of the louder instruments as any kind of contrast or progression. And we have the same approach all the way through. So there's a little feeling of kind of like a staticky feeling, right? It's just sort of like is the music really going somewhere? It seems to sort of be staying in the same place, even though it's in terms of pitches, it's rising and it's moving around and so on. So, what more could have been brought into this? Could there have been a contrast with winds? Could there have been a changing of, a contrast of registers? Could there have been more dynamic, more pronounced nuances in the, could you have eventually gotten all the way up to, say, forte here? Could there have been some sort of change of rather than a transcription, could there have been a kind of an alteration of the functions to bring out new things? Essentially you're scoring for a string sextet, and sextet music has so many cool things about it, right? There are so many different cool string sextets that do different things with theme and variations and so on. So I feel totally respectfully, I feel that there is more you could have gotten out of this. The harp could have played a role. There could have been a contrast between, maybe a call and response between strings and harp, or maybe the harp could have come in more, have it had more of a prominent role in here. So, so I just feel that watch out for doing the same, taking the same approach for too long in a slow piece, right? All right, so here we get to our 12/8 section. I'm not gonna beat it to death about long slurs and stuff. I think you could have divided this into here the slurring I think has worked out pretty nicely. But and here, I can appreciate the smoothness, and just having everything covered by the same, by one bow. But in this situation, I really would have a unified approach to the if you want this, slur, and then bow, right? I think you should have the phrasing unified here in winds and strings. I think it just would be so much more effective. And then here we have so much going on in our winds and strings, right? It just really is. There's just so much weight of everything in there, of those functions. And we have one instrument or one group of instruments playing a transcription of the left-hand figuration, right? So I feel that there, is there something more that could be done here? Could you have put in a bass clarinet to kind of help out with some of this? Could there have been you could have gone up to 3 of each, right here, 3 flutes, 3 oboes, 3 clarinets. Maybe had you done that, maybe there could have been with 3 clarinets even. And there could have been, you could have freed up a bassoon to help out with some of this, right? So, but having said that, I love the fact that it's so different, right? There isn't doubling in the winds for a change, right? At least at the beginning. So that has a strength to it as well. But I feel once again that the harp is just, may not be as, it's going to make a difference here. It wouldn't hurt to have it in octaves or have some other kind of thing to sort of firm it up a little bit. But once again, it's a very lonely instrument playing against these very thick, it's just very thickly scored strings and winds. And then moving on, I think that your sense of middle voice here is very well served in your, in the upper divisi pizzicato and the horns, but not so well in the harp, as I mentioned before. I just feel that the instruments around it are going to absorb it, really. But this is kind of cool in here. These arcing octave clarinets. They're really going to stand out. Like you're going to go up to near fortissimo here. You don't need to have a forte at the end here. Well, I see what you want to do here, but I think that the marking of mezzo forte, I think the player will understand that you are going forte, getting louder, and then back to forte, and then mezzo forte here. Just so long as the hairpin doesn't go all the way to the mezzo forte. I think so long as it's understood that this is one individual phrase. But here you have forte crescendo to forte. So what does that mean? Right? I think that you sort of want everything to push forward. What if you didn't have forte right in here? Right? What if this were just just get rid of all these fortes? What if it were just the just bringing this out as its own little octave solo phrase, and then the same thing here. Like if you get rid of the forte here, then it's more logical. You're pushing towards forte there from a mezzo forte. Yeah. So it is a sailor's hornpipe sound that you are going for here in these pronounced octaves, these loud octave clarinets. So if that's what you want, that's cool. But if there is any way to sort of moderate it, like you could lessen the effect a little bit, right? Partially a way of doing that would be to maybe have the clarinet have second clarinet at the bottom and first oboe on top, right? Or you could just stick with the clarinets and see if some of these strings could play a part, right? Because you already have some of these pitches, most of these pitches being covered by the winds anyway. So if you had the strings just suddenly just jump in and help out with the clarinets, then you get a very clear, strong tone for that function. But I know what you want to do here. You want your A2 flutes, and you want them to be doubled by the first violins and everything else. There is no reason why you couldn't have octave first violins here, and then the second violins could be divisi supporting the clarinets, right? That would be another way of lessening the very penetrating sound. Penetrating to the ear of octave clarinets right there. Okay. But but it's just it's cool the way that it wraps up and everything else. I wish I could talk about this going forwards, but I'd be breaking the rules. But I think that just in general, except for some of the reservations that I have about harp and some of the other things, maybe some of the balance, I think it pretty much, it holds together. Just watch out about putting so much weight in the function of one particular thing and not in the other, right? So of course this is a realization of the left-hand pattern, so that's fair game. So this is a place where they're just suddenly prominent, but here before they're just not that prominent, right? So if there were some way of strengthening that, maybe you don't need so much weight in the winds and strings on the harmonized melody. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Just with just to wrap this up, just once again inviting you and all the participants in this particular collection, this compilation of evaluations of our website subscribers. I really think that the orchestration challenge is just going to get better and funner, and there's going to be more things offered as we go forward, more options and cool pieces that people haven't thought of, and maybe some things that people have thought of, but not in the way that I'll be putting it forward. So anyways, on that cryptic comment, I'm just going to thank everybody and just wow, what a journey through all of these scores, and thinking about all the different strengths that they all had and how they could be improved, and thinking about some of the some of the general outlook, whether I agree with it or not, of our orchestrators. I mean, people are coming from such different directions, and yet, some of the choices are similar. Some of that's dictated by the music, but some of it is just like maybe what people have been listening to on their own as developing orchestrators or as experienced orchestrators. So that's all quite fascinating for me, and just such a wonderful opportunity for me to give whatever help I can to you if you find it helpful. I hope you do. All right, so the next one of these should be coming fairly soon. Should be released fairly soon. So watch for that, and there will be more Patreon supporter evaluations coming down the line very soon as well. All right, see you then.